I was half asleep when the phone rang. That shrill, old-fashioned sound that never means anything good after midnight. The clock on my nightstand read 12:47 a.m. I almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. But something made me reach for it anyway. Habit. Maybe. Or the restless insomnia that comes with getting old. Mr. Hayes? The voice on the other end was female, calm but nervous. This is Nurse Patel from St. Augustine's long-term care in Victoria. I'm sorry to disturb you at this hour, but we have a patient here who's asking for you. She gave your full name and number. My throat tightened. There must be a mistake. Who's asking for me? There was a pause. Eleanor. Hayes. The name hit me like a physical blow. I sat upright so fast my back cracked. That's not possible, I said. My wife's been dead for 28 years. The nurse hesitated, then lowered her voice. Sir, she was found 2 nights ago wandering near the waterfront. She's confused, weak, but lucid at times. She insisted you were her husband. She said you'd come for her. She described your wedding ring, the one with the inscription, "Still us." Even then, I felt the air leave my lungs. That inscription wasn't public. It wasn't in any obituary, not even on the gravestone. I hadn't said those words to anyone in decades. Where did you say she is? I whispered. St. Augustine's. Room 314. I couldn't move for a moment. My body was frozen, my mind racing through impossibilities. Eleanor died in 1997. I'd seen her body, or thought I had. I'd buried her. And yet this nurse, a stranger, was speaking like she'd just handed the phone to a ghost. Mr. Hayes, are you still there? Yes, I said finally, my voice barely audible. Don't let her out of your sight. Of course not, sir. The house was silent, except for the rain tapping the windows. Eleanor's old photograph still sat on the dresser beside me, her smile frozen in a world that no longer existed. I stared at it until my vision blurred. Then I stood, grabbed my coat, and whispered to the empty room. If this is real, I need to see her. The drive that night was a blur of wet highways and memories I'd spent years trying to bury. 28 years earlier, there'd been another night like this, rain hammering the windshield. The phone ringing, a voice telling me there'd been an accident on Highway 1. I remember every second of that drive to the hospital, the way my hands trembled on the steering wheel, the metallic taste of fear in my mouth. They wouldn't let me see her right away. She didn't suffer, the doctor had said. But his eyes had darted away when he said it. The crash was bad. Car versus truck. Fire. They said the body was unrecognizable. But they'd found her purse, her license, her wedding ring. That ring, the one I'd slipped onto her finger in 1972, was all I could identify. I remember sitting in that sterile hallway under flickering fluorescent lights, holding that tiny gold circle in my palm and feeling like the world had caved in. The funeral was closed casket. The smell of lilies still makes my stomach turn. I remember Matthew, only 10 years old, clutching my sleeve and asking why he couldn't see his mother one last time. What could I tell him? That she didn't look like herself anymore? That I didn't even know if it was really her under that casket lid? But grief doesn't leave room for doubt. People need closure, and I gave it to them. I gave it to myself, or tried to. Afterward, the house felt like a mausoleum. Her hairbrush still on the counter, her teacup in the sink. I couldn't bring myself to touch anything for months. Matthew grew up quiet, distant. He blamed me for not saving her, and in some small way, I blamed myself too. I told myself time would dull the edges, but time only buried the pain under thicker layers of routine, work, sleep, repeat. Until a stranger said her name like it had never been carved into a gravestone. And now, as the rain lashed my windshield, I couldn't stop thinking, what if I buried the wrong woman? Grief is strange. It doesn't fade. It just changes its shape. After Eleanor's funeral, the world kept moving, like nothing had happened. I went back to work at the accounting firm 3 weeks later because bills didn't care that half my soul was gone. Matthew withdrew into himself. He'd always been a quiet boy. But after the accident, he stopped talking about anything that mattered. At night, I'd hear him crying in his room, muffling the sound with his pillow, so I wouldn't notice. I noticed. We stumbled through the years together, two ghosts orbiting the memory of a woman who'd kept our world in order. I tried to be both father and mother, but mostly, I was just tired. By the time Matthew left for university, the house felt like a stranger's. Every creak reminded me of her. The smell of her lavender shampoo still lingered in the bathroom, long after the bottle had gone dry. I sold that house 10 years after she died. Told everyone it was for a fresh start. But really it was because I couldn't bear to sleep in our bed anymore. I moved into a smaller place near the coast, quieter, lonelier, but it suited me. I filled my days with work until retirement came, then filled my nights with silence. I never remarried. A few friends tried to set me up, but it felt dishonest. How do you give your heart to someone when it's still buried with another? Every April, on the anniversary of her death, I visited her grave. I'd bring lilies, the same kind that once made me nauseous, and talk to her about whatever nonsense was happening in the world. It wasn't about belief. It was about ritual. I told myself that was enough. I told myself I'd made peace with the past. But peace is fragile. It takes years to build and seconds to destroy. When that nurse said Eleanor's name, it was like someone reached into my chest and tore open a wound I'd spent 3 decades stitching closed. I realized then that I'd never really moved on. I'd just gotten better at pretending. And if she was really alive, if that call was true, then the life I'd built on grief was a lie. The drive to Victoria felt endless. The rain had turned to mist by dawn, the highway slick and silver in the early light. I kept replaying the nurse's words in my head like a recording I couldn't turn off. She's asking for you. My rational mind kept rejecting it, trying to explain it away. Identity theft, mistaken records. Maybe some woman with dementia who fixated on a name she'd overheard. But underneath all that logic, something deeper stirred. Hope. Terrifying. Impossible hope. The hospital was a squat concrete building overlooking the harbor, the kind of place you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for it. I parked in the visitor's lot and sat there for a long time, my hands trembling against the steering wheel. When I finally walked inside, the smell of antiseptic and old air hit me, a scent I hadn't forgotten since that night in 1997. The woman at the front desk looked up. "Can I help you?" "Richard Hayes." "I got a call. About a patient, Eleanor Hayes." Her expression flickered, that split-second shift between professionalism and disbelief. "One moment, please." She typed something into her computer, frowned, then picked up the phone. "Dr. Nguyen? The husband's here." Husband. The word felt heavy. After a minute, she hung up. "Room 314, 3rd floor. She's expecting you. Expecting me." The elevator ride was the longest of my life. I could hear my heartbeat over the hum of the machinery. When the doors opened, a nurse was waiting, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Hayes. I'm Nurse Patel. We spoke on the phone." She looked tired, sympathetic. "She's been calm since yesterday. Keeps asking for you by name." "You're sure it's her?" I asked, my voice shaking. She hesitated. Her fingerprints matched an old record. "We've notified the authorities, but, Mr. Hayes, I think you should see for yourself." My knees felt weak. She led me down a quiet hallway. The world seemed to narrow to the sound of our footsteps and the hum of the fluorescent lights. We stopped outside. A door marked 314. Through the small glass window, I saw a figure sitting upright in bed, hair silver white, eyes fixed on the door like she'd been waiting decades for me to walk through. I whispered, not even realizing I'd said it aloud. The woman looked up, and she smiled. I stood in the doorway, unable to breathe. The woman in the bed turned her head slowly, and the years collapsed in on themselves. Her hair, once a deep auburn, was now silver and thin. Her face mapped with lines time had carved deep. But those eyes, green, with a hint of gold around the pupil, were the same. I'd stared into those eyes across 1,000 mornings. "Richard," she whispered, voice trembling, fragile as glass. I took one step inside, then another, every part of my mind screaming no. It couldn't be. She'd been gone nearly 3 decades. I'd seen the death certificate. I'd buried her. And yet my heart, traitorous thing that it was, already knew. It was her. I could feel it, like a current under my skin. "Eleanor?" My voice cracked on her name. She smiled faintly, as if hearing it for the first time in forever. "You came," she said, and something in me broke. I crossed the room, afraid that if I blinked she'd vanish. I stopped beside her bed, close enough to smell the faint scent of hospital disinfectant mixed with something softer lavender, Eleanor's scent. My hand hovered over hers. How can this be?" I murmured. Her lips trembled. "I've been trying to find you. For so long. They told me you were gone. I knew they were lying." I swallowed hard. "Who told you that?" She frowned, confusion flickering across her features. "I don't remember. I just remember waking up somewhere cold. And then, years, I think. I kept trying to remember your name." Her hand lifted, weakly, toward mine. I hesitated only a moment before taking it. Her skin was papery, cool, but the shape of her fingers was exactly the same faint scar on her knuckle from when she'd cut herself slicing apples in 1989. No one else could know that. Tears burned behind my eyes. "It's me," I said. "I'm here." She exhaled, a sound halfway between relief and disbelief. "I thought you'd forgotten me." "Never," I whispered. And for a long moment, neither of us spoke. The machines beeped softly around us, and the world outside the hospital seemed to disappear. She was real, alive, but the part of my brain that had spent 28 years buried in grief couldn't stop asking one question over and over. If this was Eleanor, then who the hell had I buried? By the time the doctor arrived, my head was spinning. I'd spent an hour sitting beside her bed, watching her drift in and out of sleep, murmuring things I couldn't quite catch. When the door opened, a man in his 50s with wire-rimmed glasses stepped in. "Mr. Hayes? I'm Dr. Nguyen. I understand this has been quite a shock." That was an understatement. "What's happening here, doctor?" I asked. "Who is she?" He took a slow breath. "The woman was brought in 2 nights ago. Found near the harbor, disoriented and hypothermic. No identification. No memory of how she got there. But when she was processed, her fingerprints matched a record in an old federal database, your wife's." He held up a tablet, showing a screen with 2 sets of fingerprints, side by side, identical. "That's impossible," I said. "My wife died in 1997. "We verified the match twice," he said gently. "It's rare, but not unheard of. People sometimes disappear due to trauma, brain injury, or psychological shock. They create new identities, live new lives, without memory of the old one. You're saying she's been out there for 28 years, without remembering who she is?" "It appears that way. We've seen similar cases after accidents or prolonged institutional care." "Institutional care?" She mentioned being in a private facility, but her recollection is fragmented. "We're trying to trace her history. But so far, there's no record of medical treatment under the name Eleanor Hayes. If she was living under another name, it may take time. I shook my head. This doesn't make sense. There was a body. There was a funeral. Mistaken identity can happen under certain circumstances, he said carefully, choosing his words. Especially if visual identification was limited. We won't know more until we run a DNA test. Then do it, I said. I want it done immediately. He nodded. We've already taken her sample. We'll just need yours for comparison. He handed me a sterile swab kit. My hands shook as I followed his instructions. When he sealed it, he said quietly, "Results in 48 hours." I looked back at the woman in the bed at Eleanor, or whoever she was, and felt the ground shift beneath me. If she's really my wife, I said, then I need to know where she's been all this time. And if she's not, I swallowed hard. Then I need to know who's pretending to be her. Matted. I didn't leave her side that night. The doctors wanted to move her to a different ward, but I refused. I couldn't risk her waking up and finding herself alone again. I sat in the stiff hospital chair by her bed, listening to the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. She looked peaceful when she slept, though every so often her face twitched, like she was caught in a dream she couldn't escape. When she stirred, I leaned closer. "Eleanor? Can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, cloudy but alive. "Richard," she murmured. "You're really here." "I'm here," I said. "I'm not going anywhere." She tried to smile, but it faltered. "I keep seeing water," she whispered. "A place by the sea. Gray rocks. A fence. They said I shouldn't go near it, but I used to hear the waves. It made me feel safe." I frowned. "Where was this?" "I don't know," she said, shaking her head. "I remember the smell of salt, the sound of gulls. Then, darkness." Her voice broke. "I was locked in a room sometimes. They said I was sick, that you were gone. I kept telling them you'd come, but they just gave me pills." My throat closed. I reached for her hand. "It's okay," I said softly. "You're safe now." She nodded, eyes unfocused, lost somewhere between memory and hallucination. Then she looked at me again, more alert this time. "How's Baxter?" she asked suddenly. The question hit me like a punch. "Baxter? Our dog," she said, with a faint smile. "The golden retriever we got the year Matthew turned 5. He used to sleep by the fireplace." My chest tightened. "He died a long time ago," I said. "You remember him?" She blinked, as if testing herself. "I remember his fur on the couch. The way you used to hum to him. That tune. What was it?" I hesitated, then hummed a few bars of Moon River, the lullaby I used to sing to both her and Baxter when they couldn't sleep. Her lips trembled. "That's it," she whispered. "I thought I dreamed it." Tears blurred my vision. These were details no stranger could know. As she drifted back to sleep, I sat there in the dark, staring at her face. The logical part of me kept whispering that none of this made sense, that I should wait for proof, but in my heart, I already knew. Somehow, impossibly, my wife had come back to me. The results came 2 days later. I'd barely slept in between. Every sound in the hallway jolted me awake. Every shadow reminded me how fragile this all felt. When Dr. Nguyen walked into the room holding a folder, I already knew by the look on his face. "Mr. Hayes," he began, carefully. "The DNA analysis is complete." My pulse quickened. "And? The probability of biological identity between you and the patient is 99.98%. He hesitated before adding, "It's her. It's Eleanor." For a long moment, I couldn't speak. The words didn't fit inside me. "That's impossible," I said, though I knew it wasn't. He nodded gently. "It's rare, but the evidence is conclusive. We'll need to investigate how her death was recorded in error. But there's no doubt. She's your wife." I turned toward her bed. She was awake, staring at me with those same eyes I'd memorized all those years ago. "It's really you," I whispered. She smiled faintly, confusion and relief mingling in her expression. "I told them you'd come." My knees felt weak. I sat down beside her, taking her hand in both of mine. I'd imagined this moment 1,000 times, in dreams, in grief, in the empty years, when I spoke to her headstone, as if she could hear me. But now that she was here, warm, breathing, real, it felt almost unbearable. "Eleanor," I said, my voice breaking. "What happened to you?" She frowned, her gaze distant. "I don't know. I remember a crash, then lights, voices shouting. Then, nothing. I woke up in a place by the sea. They said I was lucky. They said my family didn't make it." Her hand trembled. I believed them. My stomach twisted. Someone had lied to her. Lied to us. "You were alive all this time," I said. "But where?" She just shook her head. "They called it Saint something. Street Germains, maybe?" "I was there for years." I looked at Dr. Nguyen. "Can you find it?" "We'll try," he said quietly. "But that facility might have closed long ago." As he left, I turned back to her, still reeling from the truth. I had grieved her for 28 years, built my life around her absence, and now, sitting in front of me, was living proof that everything I believed about her death had been a lie. If she was alive, then who had I buried? The days that followed blurred into a haze of doctors, police officers, and cautious hope. Once the DNA results confirmed her identity, everything became official. The hospital called the authorities. Reporters caught wind of it. A woman declared dead for 28 years, found alive in a long-term care facility. And suddenly, my quiet, grief-carved world became a crime scene. Detective Laura Mendez from the Victoria Police came to interview Eleanor. She was patient, but direct, speaking softly, as if not to frighten her. I stayed close, holding Eleanor's hand while she tried to piece together the fragments of a life that had been stolen. "I remember waking up in a white room," she said slowly. "There was a window, but it was barred. A woman in a blue uniform told me I'd been in an accident. She said my family had died, that there was no one left to contact." Her eyes clouded with confusion. I didn't question it. I couldn't even remember my own name back then. They gave me a new one, Helen Murray. They said it was best for me to start fresh. The detective glanced at me. "Did she mention where this facility was?" Eleanor frowned. "By the water, I think. There were seagulls, and a long fence with rusted bars. I used to sit near it and listen to the waves. They said it wasn't safe to leave." I believed them. Through therapy sessions, with the hospital psychologist, more pieces emerged. The facility wasn't a government hospital but a private care home, one that specialized in long-term trauma patients. The nurses there told her she'd suffered memory loss from a crash. They kept her medicated, isolated, dependent. She said she'd been there for years, decades maybe, though time had lost meaning. Then, one day, she woke up to find the place nearly empty. "The nurses were gone," she said, her voice trembling. "Doors unlocked. I wandered out, but I didn't know where I was. I walked until someone found me. The facility had apparently shut down months before. Its owner vanished. The records were gone. No files, no patient lists. Nothing to explain why a woman named Eleanor Hayes had lived there under another name for almost 30 years. Every answer only gave birth to more questions. Who put her there? Why was she told her family was dead? And how did a woman declared deceased in 1997 simply disappear into another life, erased and rewritten like she was nothing more than a clerical error? I couldn't sleep after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her, the bruised woman they'd shown me after the crash. The coffin. The ring. The headstone. I'd built my entire life on that moment, on the certainty that she was gone. Now, certainty was a luxury I no longer had. Detective Mendez warned me to let the police handle it. But I'd spent too many years being passive. I needed to know who had stolen my wife's life. So I called my lawyer, Michael Sanderson, a man who'd helped me settle Eleanor's estate all those years ago. When I told him what had happened, he didn't believe me at first. Then he read the police reports and called me back, his voice low and shaken. "Richard, if what you're saying is true, then this wasn't just an accident, it was a setup." We started digging. With his help, I hired a retired investigator named James Kavanaugh, an old friend of mine from my firm's audit department, sharp as a knife, cynical as sin. He pulled the old crash files, insurance claims, and coroner reports. The deeper we went, the stranger it got. The original accident had involved two vehicles, a transport truck and Eleanor's car. The fire had made identification difficult, but what James found buried in an archived insurance document turned my stomach. The claim payout. A massive life insurance policy filed by Eleanor's father's company, the same company she'd worked for before her death. It had paid out nearly $500,000 money that had quietly disappeared into a numbered account and was never audited. "Someone staged that crash," James said, tapping the file. "The car was swapped before the fire. The wrong body was in it." "But whose body?" I asked. "Female. Similar build," he said. "Never properly identified. Dental records were vague. Conveniently so. I've seen this before fraud cases in the 90s. Pre-digital records. Easier to fake back then." My stomach turned cold. "You think her father knew? If he didn't orchestrate it?" "Someone in his circle did. Probably to cover embezzlement or insurance fraud. She might have discovered something she wasn't supposed to." I stared at the papers, spread across my dining table, the ink blurring as my vision swam. "So instead of killing her, they erased her," I said quietly. James nodded. "They needed her gone, not dead. A locked-away witness doesn't talk." The truth settled like lead in my chest. The woman I buried wasn't my wife. The love of my life had been alive, hidden, drugged, forgotten, while someone else cashed in on her death. And whoever had done it had counted on one thing above all else: that I would never question a grave. The investigation stretched for months. Detective Mendez managed to trace fragments of Eleanor's fabricated identity through scattered paper trails, half-erased records, and shuttered companies. The name Helen Murray appeared in a handful of financial ledgers connected to a defunct mental health facility in Nanaimo. It wasn't a hospital, it was a privately owned institution registered under a numbered company. No medical oversight, no public record. Just one address, now an empty lot. When Mendez finally tracked down a former nurse who'd worked there in the late 90s, the story began to take shape. The woman's hands trembled as she spoke. "We were told she was a suicide risk, that she'd suffered a breakdown after her family died. But she was calm, kind, confused. Yes, but not dangerous." I remember thinking she didn't belong there. The nurse remembered something else. A man who used to visit once a month, sharply dressed, always bringing envelopes. He called himself Mr. Lowell, claimed to be Eleanor's legal guardian. Mendez found out that Lowell had been an alias for a financial officer from Eleanor's father's firm. That was the link we needed. Turns out, Eleanor had uncovered a major embezzlement scheme inside the company months before the crash. Hundreds of thousands siphoned into offshore accounts. She'd confronted someone about it. That someone, most likely her father's partner, had ties to an insurance broker who specialized in falsifying accident reports. When the operation began to collapse, they needed to eliminate evidence, and Eleanor was the only person who could connect them to the fraud. So they staged her death. A body was substituted. The crash faked. Then they had her committed under a false identity, diagnosed with severe amnesia and psychosis. It was the perfect solution. She couldn't testify if no one knew she existed. When the business folded years later, and the people involved either died or disappeared, the facility lost its funding. The patients were transferred or abandoned. Eleanor Helen Murray was left behind, unclaimed, forgotten. Every piece fit together like a grotesque puzzle, but none of it made sense in the way that mattered. How could human beings, people who once sat across from us at Christmas dinners, decide that my wife's life was expendable? She'd spent 28 years in captivity, disguised as care, medicated into silence because she'd told the truth. I looked at her one night as she slept, her face softened by lamplight, and wondered if it was better that she didn't remember everything. Some truths are worse than madness. I waited 2 weeks before calling Matthew. How do you tell your son that the dead mother he buried as a boy is alive? I rehearsed it in my head 100 times and still couldn't find the right words. When I finally called, he answered on the third ring. "Hey, Dad," he said, distracted as always. "Everything okay?" "You should come to Victoria," I said. "There's something you need to see." "What's going on?" he asked, wary. "It's about your mother." Silence. Then a short, brittle laugh. "Dad, please don't." "She's alive, Matthew." The words hung there, ridiculous, impossible. "That's not funny," he said, his tone sharp now. "I'm not joking. I have proof. DNA tests, police reports. She's at Street Augustine's." For a moment, I thought the line had gone dead. Then he whispered, "That's sick. You need help." "Just come," I said quietly. "If you still think I'm crazy after, you can walk away." 2 days later, he arrived. He hadn't been to see me in years, and when he stepped into her hospital room, I watched 30 years of carefully managed grief crumble in seconds. Eleanor looked up, eyes hazy with medication, and for a moment there was no recognition. Then she tilted her head, studying him. "You've grown," she whispered. Matthew froze. His lips parted, but no sound came. "Mom?" he said, voice breaking. She smiled faintly. "You used to draw dinosaurs on the kitchen wall," she said. "You got in so much trouble for that." He took a step toward her, tears streaking down his face. "It's really you?" She nodded, and he broke down, folding into her arms like a child again. But the moment didn't last. Hours later, he pulled me aside in the hallway, his face pale and hollow. "She remembers fragments," he said, his voice shaking. "But she doesn't remember me. Not the way I remember her. It's like, she's here, but she isn't." I had no answer. We'd gotten a miracle, but it wasn't the kind he'd prayed for. The mother he'd mourned all his life was alive. Yes, but she was a stranger shaped by loss, medication, and time. When he left that night, he said quietly, "I don't know how to feel, Dad." I didn't either. Because some reunions aren't healing, they're reminders of how much you can never get back. The 1997 case was reopened officially that fall. The file had gathered dust for nearly 3 decades. Buried in archives under the label, "Closed, Accidental Death." Detective Mendez handed me a copy of the coroner's report one morning over coffee. "I think you should see this," she said. The language was cold and bureaucratic, but the lies jumped off the page. The dental records used to identify the body weren't Eleanor's, they'd been falsified. The dentist listed on the report hadn't actually treated her. His signature had been forged. Mendez's team traced the falsified forms to a clinic in Burnaby that had been bought out by one of Eleanor's father's former associates, a man named David Lang. He was still alive, retired, living quietly on Vancouver Island. 2 weeks later, he was arrested. Lang had been the company's accountant during the embezzlement years. He was arrested. Lang had been the company's accountant. 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 When confronted, he didn't even try to deny it. We were told she knew too much, he said during questioning. And the Dernside. And Amender. Well and 40. It wasn't my idea. Her father wanted it quiet. He thought she'd lose everything if the fraud came out. The crash was supposed to cover the missing money. His words felt like acid. I'd always respected her father. A stern but honest man. Or so I thought. But Mendez explained it simply. When the company was collapsing, the men in charge panicked. Eleanor had uncovered their offshore accounts and was preparing to go to the authorities. Instead of facing ruin, they buried her alive in bureaucracy. Lang admitted to arranging the falsified reports and paying off the coroner to close the case quickly. We never thought it would last this long, he said. After her father died, there was no reason to keep her hidden. But by then, we'd lost track. The facility changed ownership. She just disappeared. I stared at him through the glass of the interrogation room. This frail old man who'd helped destroy 2 lives for profit. She didn't disappear, I said quietly. You erased her. He looked down. Same thing, isn't it? But it wasn't. One is an accident. The other is a crime that breathes for decades. Lang was charged with conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction. The media went wild, calling it the widow who wasn't. Reporters camped outside the hospital for days. Eleanor never read the headlines. She just kept asking if it was over. I wanted to say yes. But when you've spent nearly 30 years living with a ghost, closure isn't a moment. It's a slow, painful reckoning that never truly ends. Winter came early that year. The leaves outside the hospital turned brittle and gold before collapsing into the soil. Eleanor had been moved to a rehabilitation ward by then, her health fragile but improving. The doctors called it progress. I called it a miracle, stitched together with heartbreak. The therapy sessions helped her recall more of the missing years, though each memory came at a cost. They kept me in a room with no windows, she told me one afternoon, her voice trembling. There was a nurse who called me Helen. She said, I'd tried to hurt myself. I hadn't. I just wanted to go home. She paused, eyes unfocused. I used to hear your voice sometimes like an echo. You'd be humming. That song. The river one. I smiled sadly. Moon River. Yes, she said, tears gathering in her eyes. I thought I was dreaming. I'd hold on to it, so I wouldn't forget who I was. I took her hand. You never forgot, I said. You just got lost for a while. Some days, the memories came too fast. Snapshots of men in suits, papers signed under sedation, words like institutional guardianship and evaluation reports. Other days, she'd stare out the window, quiet, trying to find the woman she used to be. One night, she looked at me and said, I'm sorry I left you. I leaned forward, my voice steady but breaking inside. You didn't leave me, Eleanor. They made sure you couldn't come home. She nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. I wasted your life. You saved mine, I said. You kept me human, even when I thought you were gone. We sat in silence, the hum of hospital machines filling the room like background music to a life being rewritten. She reached out and touched my face, tracing the lines time had carved. You waited, she whispered. Of course I did, I said. You're my only home. For the first time in years, her smile reached her eyes. Outside, the wind rattled the window panes, and for a fleeting moment, it sounded like the sea. Spring returned before we knew it. The air smelled of rain and thawed earth, and, for the first time in nearly 3 decades, the house didn't feel empty. Eleanor moved in slowly, first a few nights a week, then for good. We took it one step at a time. She'd lost so much, but she was determined to reclaim what pieces of her life she could. I cleared out the guest room and filled it with light. Soft curtains, photographs from our early years, a shelf lined with the books she used to love. She spent her mornings by the window, sketching the maple tree in the yard, drinking tea with too much sugar just like before. Some days were better than others. There were moments she'd wake up disoriented, whispering, "Where am I?" But then she'd see me, and that distant fog would lift. We didn't talk much about the lost years anymore. The doctors said healing meant living in the present. I tried. I really did. Still, there were nights when I'd catch her standing in the hallway, staring at our wedding photo, tears glinting in the dim light. She'd whisper, "I missed so much," and I never knew what to say except, "We still have now." Months later, she asked me to take her somewhere. "I need to see it," she said. "The grave. The one that bore her name." We drove out to the small cemetery on the edge of town, where the cherry trees were in bloom. The headstone stood exactly where I'd left it, weathered but solid. The inscription faded by time. Eleanor Hayes, 1951, 1997, beloved wife and mother. She stared at it for a long while, hands trembling slightly. Then she knelt, placed a bouquet of white lilies at its base, and whispered, "For the woman I used to be." There was no bitterness in her voice, just quiet acceptance, the kind that comes after years of pain. When she rose, she slipped her arm through mine, and we walked back to the car without looking back. That night, we sat on the porch as the sun dipped below the horizon. The sky streaked in gold and violet. She rested her head on my shoulder, and for the first time in years, I felt peace. Some resurrections, I've learned, are miracles beautiful, impossible gifts that pull you back from the edge. But others are warnings, reminders that the truth never really stays buried. It waits, patient and silent, beneath the surface until one day it claws its way back into the light, demanding to be seen. This story was brutal. But this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.